Okay.
I'm from Salisbury, Massachusetts. I collect Autocat racing snowmobiles as a hobby. Been doing it for about 5-6 years. As a result, I've accumulated somewhat of a small collection and brought them here today from the vintage run in New York. So, what we're sitting on right now is a 1973 EXT 650. It's referred to as a Team 8-bolt sled. It had different fiberglass with some different modifications. The sled basically has the same features as a 73 EXT 650 with just minor variations in regards to the modifications. It was a team that was recognized by Autocat. They worked right out of the factory. They had close ties to the factory and were very successful and very competitive in their dealings. And that's the first sled.
Okay.
The second sled is a 1977 Autocat Snow Pro. It's a 440. The sled originally was out of New York, and we took it apart, totally restored the sled, right down every bolt, completely gone through. It does run. I do use it. I've had fun with it on the lake today.
Okay.
It's probably one of the sleds that I put the most work into.
Okay.
This sled here is a 1973 Formula 2. Short history on this to make it short. This was a sled that was originally ordered by a dealership, and they were denied. As they were uncrating a Panther, they discovered there was a Formula 2 in the crate. They hid the sled for a year, maybe 2 years, until the heat cooled off. The factory was no longer looking for it. So after a year or two, they took it out and drove it around the dealership. It sat up on a bin about 14 feet up in an old barn out in back of the dealership until 2 years ago when I discovered it. And it hasn't run until today, as a matter of fact. Today was the first day we actually took it out. The blue ink was still on the brake. The anodizing on the tunnel was as fresh as the day it was new. It was just absolutely correct right from the factory.
So what's the story with the 2 plugs per cylinder here?
Dual ignition, that was significant in the 1973 era. They ran the dual ignition in 1973. They carried it over into 1974 and 75. 74, they went to a liquid Kawasaki. They had some porting problems. They went back to the free air Kawasaki's for 75. And then, of course, they changed over to Suzuki, and they still experimented with dual ignition at that point. But that's just the era of 73 when they experimented with the dual ignition. These came through with a gear reduction unit, and what you'll find is in this area right here is a gear reduction. They didn't pan out very well for Autocat, so a lot of the people used to remove the gear reduction. They would actually cut one of the main frame structures that ran along the frame. They would shift the motor over to the left so they could line the clutch up with the driven clutch, and in doing so, it really made it a miserable job for restoring a Formula 2 because of the major altercation they made in the frame structure. It's something you got to be careful about when you buy a Formula 2 if you can find it.
Okay.
Of course, the gear reductions are mostly missing. But that's it, unrestored as is, right from the factory. 1971, some people refer to them as a 72. These are Turf Tigers. Best of my knowledge, they made 50 in each class. They made them in 290s, 340s, and 440s. The significant difference between an EXT and a Turf Tiger is bogies. It's one of the few cats that has bogies, has a rubber track, has an aluminum bulkhead, whereas the EXTs were very similar in design structure, but they ran a steel bulkhead. Okay. This was aluminum. They were made to run on alcohol. They were made specifically for dragging on grass.
Oh, okay.
That was all they were designed to do.
Okay.
Tough to find. A lot of guys, when they became inadequate for grass racing, used to set them up for snow. You find snow suspensions under them. And then eventually some of them became trail sleds. They were great small sleds. As time went on, you put a fan motor in them, and the kids ran them through the trails. And a lot of them still live their lives as beaters in the trails today. Once in a while, you find them. King Cat, I guess it was appropriately named. It gets a lot of attention. A lot of people recognize it. I think it gets a lot of attention because of the size of the motor and its name. It's heavy. It's got a lot of torque. It goes great in a straight line. You get into a corner, and it doesn't want a corner. The weight wants to take you wherever the sled wants to go. This is an unrestored one. This came from a dealer who was a dealer in the late 60s. I believe he got out of Autocat in the early 70s sometime. It was a short-lived dealership. He had it in his barn for a number of years, traded it in at an Autocat dealership about 6 or 7 years ago, and then I learned about it. It came out of Dwegiac, Michigan. And it sat at the dealership for about 5 years, I think. And, I come along, learned about it, decided I wanted to. But this is an all-original 71 800 4-cylinder. It's unusual to find the correct clutch and the correct carburetors. These are known as Mikuni pumpers. Unlike the Mikunis of today, of course we have flat slides today, but years ago they had the round slides. These are butterflies, and with a pumper assembly located on the bottom, these were the so-called carb of the day, but within the next year they were replaced by the slide valve carburetors. So a lot of these are no longer on the King Cats. They're tough to find. This is one that happened to have the original carburetors as well as the original clutch. The clutch is not forgiving. There are many other clutches you can run on it. It really helped the motor a little bit better than this one does, but for originality, that's what goes. The skis, it's always been a myth as to what they put on the skis. To the best of my knowledge, and I don't hold me to this, I believe they're cadmium plated. I've heard everything from galvanized to painted to chrome. I think it's cadmium plated.
Okay.
That concludes this. This is an original 1973 EXT. This is unrestored. The first thing you notice on EXTs is they cut the front of the hoods out for more airflow.
Yeah.
You got to get them to breathe. You got to get them to cool. So they cut that out. The back of the hoods, if you notice the back of the hoods, there's a lot of fiberglass in this area.
Yeah.
This was also removed. It allowed for the air to flow a little more efficiently. Plus, you could reach right into the motor and you can make your adjustments in the motor without having to lift the hood.
Oh, okay.
You notice it's a little difficult to put your hands in there.
Okay.
But this is an original, very much like the Avelis sled that you saw just a little earlier. Basically the same motor. There were two different versions of top ends. They had them with the thin fins, they had them with the thick fins. The thicker fin was more of a racing application. They call it racing application, but I can't see these being used for trail use.
Okay.
Pipes are all original. One pipe does stick out, the other two exit inside the belly pan.
Oh, okay.
Tunnels are very thin. What you're going to find on these is the tunnels, they self-destructed. It's like tin foil, they wrinkle up, you couldn't get them straight again. Cat, in 1973, as early as 73, was issuing reproduction, strike that, replacement tunnels, which was a flat-sided tunnel, unlike the original tunnel that came on the machines, had a ribbed side to it.
Oh, okay.
So you'll find a lot of these 73 XTs with what I call the 72 tunnels, the flat tunnels. The aluminum front ends, they'd self-destruct, the motor would pull, they would tweak the front end, and you'd get a rocking sensation if you put the sled on concrete. The sled would actually teeter on you because of the torque would twist the sled. So they updated it to some steel front ends. You'll periodically find that on some of the sleds.
Okay.
This is a 1976 440 Cat Snow Pro. It's been completely restored. This is basically the 77 watt motor. You find a lot of these motors in Z sleds. Again, Cat experimented in 1976 and 77 with a multitude of different motors. A lot of guys like to use this motor for restoration purposes only because more of it sticks up through the hood. It has a more menacing effect when looking at it with all the motors sticking up through the hood. Basically, it's very similar to the 77 Snow Pros. The chassis are very much alike. 76, there were some differences in the way they mounted the posts. Some were a center post mount, some were an offset post mount. There are some chassis differences in the front, but nothing to any major degree. It would take time for me to point them out. The next sled is the other number 9 sled. This is an original number 9 sled. This came out of Thief River Falls some years ago, and they built 6 of these. I believe there might be one spare chassis, but they made a total of 6. Each driver was given 2 of these sleds. I can put my hands on 3 of them today. I own 2. One is out in Wisconsin, and I don't know if the other 3 even exist. These are a very trick sled. In 1977, they came out with a solid, single-post, solid-leaf suspension sled, and Polaris surprised everybody by coming out with the IFS. Result, Cat had to do something quick, as did Skidoo, as did Yamaha. Went back to the factory, and in 1977 and a half, manufactured 6 of these sleds with an independent front suspension. These are the first sleds that Cat ever ran with an IFS front suspension.
Okay.
They handle very differently. Very differently.
Is differently not necessarily good?
They hook. When they get into a corner, they stay into the corner. There's not a lot of forgiveness in the sled. It's not something that I would take someone who's never been on one of these and say, here, I want you to go out and compete with this sled. I'd want them to get a little time and effort on the sled before I put someone on it. It does handle different. I guess if you're used to vintage sleds and then jump onto this, you're going to get a different ride out of this sled. The motor is a round barrel motor right out of the factory. Just dynoed right up to Thief River Falls at 115 horsepower. The sled weighs under 300 pounds. It's made to corner. It does that very well. Tracks are lightweight. Everything is built with aluminum, magnesium, or some titanium. It's a very rare sled.
From New York, Rochester.